The Secret of the Merkaba, a spiritualist's guide to ascension. The deepest secrets of the Merkaba were carefully preserved by ancient scribes, not because they feared their revelation, but because they understood the transformative power such knowledge could awaken in the hands of those who were not prepared to receive it. Gershom Scholem, scholar of Jewish mysticism. Imagine a symbol so powerful it needed to be concealed for millennia, encoded in ancient manuscripts and reserved only for the highest initiates. This is the mystery of the Merkaba, the celestial vehicle described in the most enigmatic Jewish mystical texts ever discovered. The word Merkaba derives from ancient Hebrew, combining Merkav, meaning chariot, and referring to God. More than a simple divine transport object, the Merkaba represents a complex energy system, a spiritual technology that would allow the initiate to transcend the limits of physical existence and ascend to celestial realms. In the depths of the Cairo Geniza, an ancient Egyptian synagogue where sacred manuscripts were preserved for nearly 1,000 years, archaeologists discovered fragments of texts mentioning the Merkaba. The dry aroma of yellowed parchments, with their ink almost faded by time, held secrets that remained dormant for centuries. The Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, considered one of the oldest texts in the Kabbalistic tradition, contains veiled references to the Merkaba. This manuscript, possibly dated to the 2nd century of the Common Era, describes the 32 paths of wisdom and the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet as instruments of cosmic creation. But what few know is that between its lines exist codes that, when deciphered, would reveal the secrets of spiritual ascension through the Merkaba. The Haichalot texts, or celestial palaces, comprise another set of manuscripts fundamental to understanding the Merkaba mystery. These documents, preserved in fragments scattered across various collections around the world, describe mystical journeys through the 7 palaces or celestial dimensions. Their authors, Jewish mystics from the Talmudic period, between the 3rd and 8th centuries, detailed elaborate rituals of purification, meditation, and visualization necessary to activate the Merkaba. Why were these texts so carefully guarded? Why was the Merkaba tradition transmitted only orally, from master to disciple, with extreme caution? A mosaic discovered in an ancient synagogue in Beit Alpha, northern Israel, dated to the 6th century, presents celestial symbols that many archaeologists interpret as coded representations of the Merkaba. The mosaic displays a circular zodiac with the sun at the center, surrounded by 4 figures in the corners, possibly alluding to the 4 faces of the cherubim described in Ezekiel's vision. The vision of the prophet Ezekiel, recorded in the 1st chapter of the biblical book bearing his name, is considered the primary source of the Merkaba tradition. In it, Ezekiel describes a storm coming from the north, a great cloud with flashing fire, and in the midst of it, something like the gleam of amber in the center of the fire. From this vision emerge 4 living beings, each with 4 faces, of a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle, and 4 wings. Above them, a crystalline firmament supported a sapphire throne where the divine presence resided. Was this description merely a mystical vision, or a detailed code for activating the Merkaba? What were the Merkava mystics really hiding in their texts? Prepare for a journey through the most enigmatic manuscripts of antiquity, where each word might be a key to unlocking the secrets of spiritual ascension. The Haichalot literature, preserved in fragments found in the Cairo Geniza and other collections, reveals an elaborate system of mystical practices designed to prepare the initiate for the journey through the Merkaba. These texts, written in archaic Hebrew and Aramaic, frequently use ciphered and symbolic language that has challenged translators for centuries. One of the most intriguing manuscripts, known as Ma'ase Merkaba, or Work of the Chariot, contains detailed instructions on the states of consciousness necessary for ascension. The text describes how the mystic must purify himself through rigorous fasts, ritual immersions, and recitation of specific divine names, sequences of sacred sounds that would alter the vibratory frequency of the practitioner. He who contemplates the Merkaba must sit in fast for certain days, place his head between his knees, and whisper to the ground many hymns and songs. Then he will perceive the interior and the chambers, as if seeing the 7 palaces with his own eyes, and will see as if entering one palace after another and seeing what is in them. This passage reveals a specific meditative posture, the head between the knees, that would induce altered states of consciousness. Modern researchers suggest this position could alter blood flow to the brain, facilitating visionary experiences. But was it merely a physical technique, or was there a deeper meaning to this instruction? The manuscripts repeatedly warn about the dangers of this practice. 4 sages, according to Talmudic tradition, entered the Pardes, or the mystical garden, possibly a metaphor for the Merkaba experience. Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Aher, and Rabbi Akiva. One died, one went mad, one became a heretic, and only one, Rabbi Akiva, entered in peace and departed in peace. This warning suggests that the Merkaba experience could literally disintegrate those who were not adequately prepared. Parchment fragments found at Qumran, near the Dead Sea, dated to the 1st century before the Common Era, contain references to wheels of light and thrones of fire that some scholars connect to the Merkaba tradition. These Essene texts, contemporary with the formation of early Christianity, suggest that knowledge of the Merkaba may have influenced other mystical traditions of the Eastern Mediterranean. A fascinating detail emerges when comparing these manuscripts with Gnostic texts discovered at Nag Hammadi, Egypt. The Apocalypse of Paul, a Gnostic text from the 3rd century, describes the apostles' ascension through multiple heavens, meeting guardians and reciting passwords at each gate, a pattern remarkably similar to the journeys described in Jewish Haikalot texts. Could the Merkaba be a universal spiritual technology, encoded in different traditions? Archaeological artifacts reinforce this possibility. A Sassanid silver cup, discovered in northern Iran and dated to the 5th century, bears an engraving that scholars interpret as a representation of the Merkaba, a throne surrounded by flaming wheels and angelic figures with multiple faces. This object suggests that Merkaba symbolism transcended cultural boundaries, influencing art and religious thought beyond Judaism. The Sefer Yetzirah, in its description of the Sephirot, or divine emanations, offers another layer of understanding about the Merkaba. The text describes 10 Sephirot as 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11, an enigmatic formulation that some commentators interpret as a reference to the sacred geometry of the Merkaba. The 10 Sephirot, when visualized three-dimensionally, would form a complex geometric structure, possibly the ascension vehicle itself. Contemplate 10 Sephirot of nothingness. Their end is fixed in their beginning, and their beginning in their end, like a flame bound to a coal. This passage suggests a self-sustaining energetic structure, a perpetually regenerative force field, precisely what would be necessary to transcend the limitations of physical reality. But what really happened during the Merkaba experience? The texts speak of transformation, not merely vision. The mystic did not simply observe the celestial realms. He became a being of light, capable of navigating through higher dimensions. What did the ancients know about consciousness that we have forgotten? The answer may lie hidden between the lines of these enigmatic manuscripts. The preservation of Merkaba texts through the centuries represents a historical enigma in itself. During periods of intense religious persecution, such as the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in the 70th year of the Common Era, or the Crusades in the Middle Ages, sacred manuscripts were systematically destroyed. How, then, did this esoteric knowledge survive? The answer may lie in the coded nature of the texts themselves. Merkaba tradition manuscripts frequently employed concealment techniques. Words replaced by gematria or numerical values, elaborate metaphors, and obscure references that only initiates would understand. A notable example is the use of pargod, meaning curtain or veil in Haishalot texts, to describe the barrier between material and spiritual realms, a concept echoing the temple veil that separated the Holy of Holies. In the Cairo Geniza, accidentally discovered in 1896, more than 300,000 fragments of Jewish manuscripts were preserved, many containing references to the Merkaba. This extraordinary collection survived because Jewish tradition forbids the destruction of texts containing the divine name. Thus, ancient documents were ritually deposited in this text cemetery within the Ben Ezra synagogue. Among these fragments, researchers identified pages of the Shiur Koma, or Measure of the Divine Body, a mystical text describing the cosmic dimensions of God's body. Information considered so sacred that its mere recitation, according to the manuscript, would guarantee the practitioner a place in the world to come. This text presents a detailed visualization of divine proportions, possibly serving as a map for navigation through the Merkaba. Why was such knowledge reserved only for mature initiates, never before the age of 40, as Talmudic texts specify? What made this knowledge potentially dangerous? A mosaic discovered in an ancient synagogue in Sepphoris, Galilee, dated to the 5th century, presents an enigmatic geometric pattern surrounding the central zodiac figure. Archaeologists noted that this pattern, when mathematically analyzed, corresponds precisely to the description of the Merkaba energy structure found in certain manuscripts. Was it a deliberately coded visual representation to preserve this knowledge even in plain sight? Merkaba texts frequently mention the Hashmalim, angelic beings of speaking fire who guard the celestial portals. The Hebrew word hashmal, variously translated as amber, electrum, or polished bronze, appears only in Ezekiel's vision. Modern linguists note an intriguing similarity with the word for electricity in modern Hebrew, hashmal. Were ancient mystics describing electromagnetic fields using the vocabulary available in their time? Manuscripts preserved in the Ambrosian Library in Milan contain Merkaba diagrams that, when superimposed on modern quantum models of energy fields, reveal surprising correspondences. These diagrams, dated to the 12th century, show complex geometric configurations of wheels within wheels that some contemporary physicists compare to models of subatomic particles in superposition states. The Merkaba tradition did not remain static through the centuries. Later, Kabbalistic manuscripts, such as the Zohar from the 13th century and the writings of Isaac Luria from the 16th century, incorporated and expanded Merkaba concepts, integrating them into more elaborate cosmological systems. The Zohar describes the Merkaba as the secret of secrets, accessible only to those who have become a throne for the divine presence. Luria, in his manuscripts preserved in Safed, Israel, developed the concept of Tzimtzum, or divine contraction, that offers a metaphysical explanation for the functioning of the Merkaba. The celestial vehicle would operate through the empty spaces left by the contraction of divine light during creation. A fragmentary scroll, discovered in Fez, Morocco, and dated to the 14th century, contains precise instructions for visualizing the Chayo, the living creatures that sustain the Merkaba. The text describes how the practitioner must simultaneously visualize the four faces: man, lion, eagle, and ox, merging into a single composite consciousness. This multidimensional visualization technique anticipates quantum physics concepts by centuries. What was the true purpose of this knowledge? The manuscripts suggest that the Merkaba was not merely a vehicle for visionary experiences, but a technology for complete transformation of being. We are only beginning to decipher the hidden code in the Merkaba manuscripts. What more do these ancient texts have to reveal to us? The parallels between the Merkaba tradition and other mystical systems around the world raise fascinating questions about possible common origins or intercultural transmission of esoteric knowledge. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests surprising connections that transcend geographical and temporal boundaries. Egyptian papyri from the Berlin collection, dated to the Ptolemaic period in the 3rd century before the Common Era, contain hieroglyphs describing the solar bark, a celestial vehicle that transported the pharaoh through the dimensions of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. The ritual instructions in these papyri for the soul's journey present notable parallels with Merkaba protocols, preliminary purifications, recitations of power names, and specific geometric visualizations. A particularly intriguing detail emerges when comparing the Merkaba description in the Haikalot text Rayot Yehezkel, or Visions of Ezekiel, with the Egyptian Book of Amduat. Both describe a divine vehicle composed of concentric wheels of light, guarded by beings with multiple faces, and both mention the need to pronounce specific power names at each dimensional portal. Is this coincidence or evidence of a shared esoteric tradition between ancient Near Eastern cultures? Sanskrit texts from the Vedic tradition, such as the Vimana Shastra, describe celestial vehicles operated through mantras and sacred geometric configurations. Manuscripts preserved in Tibetan monasteries speak of the dorje, a ritual scepter representing the lightning vehicle, an ascension instrument that would allow the tantric practitioner to navigate between dimensions. The structural similarity between these concepts and the Merkaba is remarkable. A particularly enigmatic manuscript, preserved in the library of St. Catherine's Monastery on Mount Sinai, contains a Merkaba diagram with annotations in Greek, Aramaic, and a third unidentified language. Dated approximately to the 4th century, this document suggests a transmission of knowledge between Jewish, early Christian, and possibly Gnostic mystical traditions. The diagram shows the Merkaba as two interlaced tetrahedral pyramids, forming a three-dimensional star, a configuration that also appears in medieval alchemical texts as a representation of the celestial marriage between opposing principles. This same sacred geometry appears in Alexandrian Hermetic manuscripts, suggesting a shared symbolic language between different esoteric schools of the Mediterranean. Why did so many independent mystical traditions converge on such similar symbolism and practices? The most provocative hypothesis, suggested by fragments found among the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, is that there existed a mystical proto-tradition that preceded formalized religions, a system of direct experiential knowledge about the multidimensional nature of consciousness. This primordial tradition would have been progressively encoded in different cultural systems, preserving its essential core through symbolism adapted to each context. A particularly intriguing fragment from the Gospel of Thomas, a Gnostic text from the 2nd century, seems to allude to this possibility. If those who lead you say to you, "See, the kingdom is in the sky," then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, "It is in the sea," then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. This passage remarkably echoes the central concept of the Merkaba, that the divine vehicle is not something external to be found, but a latent energetic structure within the human being itself, awaiting activation. Manuscripts discovered in the Dunhuang caves in China, dated to the 8th century, contain tantric Buddhist diagrams that represent the subtle body as a vehicle composed of energy wheels or chakras and channels or nadis. These diagrams, when compared with certain Merkaba illustrations found in medieval Kabbalistic manuscripts, reveal structural correspondences that could hardly be accidental. The Islamic Sufi tradition developed the concept of the Miraj, the night journey of Prophet Muhammad through the seven heavens, which presents notable parallels with the Merkaba ascension. Sufi manuscripts preserved in Istanbul describe breathing techniques, recitation of divine names, and geometric visualizations that resemble Merkaba protocols, suggesting a possible transmission of knowledge between Abrahamic mystical traditions. What makes these connections even more fascinating is that many of these traditions developed during periods of limited intercultural contact. How to explain such similarities? Were they all describing the same objective reality, accessible through altered states of consciousness? What would be the ultimate purpose of this seemingly universal knowledge? The manuscripts converge on one answer: the complete transformation of the human being and conscious reintegration with the divine source. Are we looking at fragments of an ancient spiritual science encoded in manuscripts that we are only now beginning to truly decipher? The geometric structure of the Merkaba, as described in the most esoteric manuscripts, reveals a surprising mathematical complexity that transcends the scientific knowledge of the time when they were written. Fragments preserved in the Oxford collection, dated to the 10th century, contain diagrams that, when analyzed with modern mathematical tools, reveal properties of non-Euclidean geometry and torsion fields. A particularly revealing manuscript, known as Sod Ha-Egos, or The Secret of the Nut, describes the Merkaba as two interlaced pyramids of light, one pointing upward and one downward, rotating in opposite directions. This configuration, when mathematically modeled, creates a toroidal field that remarkably resembles contemporary models of the human electromagnetic field. The upper Merkaba rotates from right to left, while the lower rotates from left to right, and at the point of their intersection, the throne of glory manifests. This description, found in a Cairo Geniza fragment, suggests a counter-rotation system that would generate a third field, possibly what modern physicists would call a scalar field. Manuscripts preserved in the Leningrad Library contain precise instructions for visualizing the Merkaba proportions, based on what the text calls cubes within cubes, a description remarkably reminiscent of the modern concept of fractal geometry. The text specifies that these proportions must follow the golden ratio, a mathematical ratio found abundantly in nature and considered aesthetically perfect. Why were ancient mystics so concerned with specific geometric proportions? The texts suggest that certain geometric configurations, when precisely visualized, would act as keys to unlock latent capabilities of human consciousness. A fragmentary scroll discovered at Qumran contains what appears to be a set of instructions for the sonic activation of the Merkaba. The text describes specific sequences of Hebrew vowels that, when intoned at certain frequencies, would create vibratory patterns capable of harmonizing the light vehicle with the higher realms. This description evokes modern cymatics experiments, where sound waves create geometric patterns in physical media. Acoustic studies conducted in underground chambers of ancient Galilean synagogues revealed surprising resonant properties. When certain sound sequences described in Merkaba texts are reproduced in these spaces, harmonic patterns form that precisely correspond to the geometric diagrams found in the manuscripts. Is this coincidence or evidence of sophisticated knowledge of sacred acoustics? A fundamental aspect of the Merkaba tradition, often neglected by modern scholars, is its ethical dimension. The manuscripts are unanimous. Access to the Merkaba was permitted only to those who had achieved a high degree of moral and spiritual purification. A text preserved in the Munich collection categorically states, "He who seeks to enter the palace without having purified his heart will be consumed by the fire of the Hashmalim. This ethical requirement was not merely a religious restriction, but a practical necessity, according to the texts. Merkaba activation apparently amplified and externalized the inner state of the practitioner. An impure heart, dominated by selfish desires or negative intentions, would create destructive energetic configurations when amplified by the power of the Merkaba. A particularly explicit manuscript, preserved in the Vatican Library, warns, "He who ascends with thoughts of domination or personal power will be torn apart between the realms, neither alive nor dead, trapped between dimensions until the end of times." CT. This warning suggests that Merkaba technology could literally fragment the consciousness of the practitioner if used with impure intentions. The Haikalo texts describe in detail the guardians of the gates, entities that would test the practitioner at each stage of ascension. These tests were not of intellectual knowledge, but of moral integrity and clarity of intention. A fragment preserved in Amsterdam describes how these guardians assume forms that reflect the hidden fears and desires of the ascendant, revealing that which he hides even from himself. Why was this system of ethical safeguards considered so essential? The manuscripts suggest that the Merkaba was not just a vehicle of spiritual transport, but a creation technology, potentially capable of manifesting realities according to the consciousness of the operator. This creative dimension of the Merkaba is elaborated in later Kabbalistic texts, particularly in Moses Cordovero's Pardes Rimonim from the 16th century, which describes how the Merkaba geometry serves as a mold for the manifestation of divine energy into concrete forms. According to this text, the advanced mystic not only travels through the Merkaba, but learns to operate its principles to consciously participate in the ongoing creative process of the universe. Are we looking at not just a vehicle of spiritual ascension, but a consciousness technology capable of reshaping reality itself? The relevance of Merkaba manuscripts for our contemporary era transcends historical or religious interest. These ancient texts, when interpreted through an interdisciplinary lens integrating quantum physics, neuroscience, and consciousness studies, offer surprisingly applicable perspectives to the existential and spiritual challenges of the modern world. A particularly relevant aspect is the concept of non-local consciousness implicit in Merkaba texts. When the Maseh Bereshit manuscript describes how the mystic can be simultaneously here and in the upper palaces, it is articulating a principle that resonates with contemporary discoveries about quantum entanglement and non-locality. The Merkaba experience suggests that human consciousness is not limited to the physical brain, but can operate in a distributed manner across multiple dimensions of reality. Recently translated fragments from the Manchester collection contain passages describing how the Merkaba practitioner learns to see from all angles simultaneously, a capability that transcends linear three-dimensional perception. This description evokes the concept of holographic vision proposed by contemporary neuroscientists, where consciousness can access information from the unified field, independent of space-time limitations. When the wheels of the Merkaba align perfectly, time ceases to be a line and becomes a point where every moment exists simultaneously. This passage, found in a manuscript from the Jerusalem collection, remarkably anticipates contemporary theories about the illusory nature of linear time and the possibility of accessing states of consciousness, where past, present, and future are perceived as coexistent. Merkaba texts frequently mention the advanced mystic's ability to read the book of cosmic memory, possibly a reference to what Eastern traditions call Akashic records, and what some contemporary researchers relate to the quantum information field. This ability suggests that human consciousness, when properly tuned, can directly access a universal repository of knowledge. A particularly provocative manuscript, preserved in the Prague collection, describes how the Merkaba practitioner learns to navigate between parallel worlds, a concept that resonates with the many worlds theory of quantum physics. The text suggests that alternative realities coexist and that trained consciousness can move between them, selecting lines of possibility through focused intention. The Merkaba is not merely a vehicle for traveling through space, but an instrument for reconfiguring the very structure of perceived reality. This passage, found in a medieval commentary on Hechelot texts, suggests that Merkaba technology would operate at the fundamental level of the interface between consciousness and material reality, precisely the point where, according to interpretations of quantum mechanics, conscious observation collapses possibilities into concrete experiences. Merkaba activation protocols, when examined through contemporary neuroscience, reveal a sophisticated system of neurological reprogramming. The specific geometric visualizations, combined with breathing patterns and vocalizations, would create states of neural coherence that would facilitate the reorganization of synaptic networks, potentially allowing new modes of perception and cognition. An often neglected aspect of the Merkaba tradition is its collective dimension. Later manuscripts, particularly from the Safed Kabbalistic school, describe rituals where groups of mystics synchronized their Merkaba practices to create a unified field of ascension. This collective practice would supposedly exponentially amplify the effect, creating what the text calls a composite Merkaba, a multidimensional vehicle generated by the unified consciousness of the group. This collective dimension resonates with contemporary research on shared consciousness fields and group coherence effects. Recent studies on collective meditation have demonstrated measurable effects on environmental electromagnetic fields when groups synchronize their states of consciousness, a phenomenon that could be related to the effects described in collective Merkaba rituals. The Merkaba tradition, in its essence, does not deal merely with individual mystical experiences, but with a fundamental transformation in the relationship between consciousness and reality. The manuscripts suggest that the ultimate purpose of this practice was to prepare humanity for a collective evolution of consciousness, a quantum leap in perception that would transcend the limitations of three-dimensional experience. A particularly prophetic manuscript, preserved in the Florence collection and dated to the 13th century, contains an intriguing passage. A time will come when the secrets of the Merkaba will be needed not just for the chosen few, but for all humanity. When the veil between worlds becomes thin and ancient structures begin to crumble, the knowledge of the light vehicle will be widely revealed. This passage seems to anticipate a period of global transformation, possibly the very transition era that many feel we are experiencing today. The existential, ecological, and social challenges of our time could be creating precisely the conditions that ancient mystics predicted as the moment for the wider revelation of Merkaba secrets. Recently deciphered fragments from the Cairo Geniza contain instructions for what the text calls the planetary Merkaba, a global-scale application of the energetic principles of the individual Merkaba. The manuscript describes how advanced practitioners could collaborate to create an ascension field that would envelop the entire Earth, facilitating a collective transformation of human consciousness. When enough light-bearers activate their Merkabas in harmony, the Earth itself will awaken its dormant Merkaba, and all beings will feel the call to ascend. This passage suggests a vision of spiritual evolution not as an individual journey of escape from the material world, but as a collective process of planetary transformation. This perspective resonates with contemporary theories about Earth as an integrated living system and with emerging concepts about morphogenetic fields and collective consciousness. The idea that individual spiritual practices could contribute to a systemic global transformation finds parallels in recent research on group coherence effects in complex systems. A crucial aspect of the Merkaba tradition emphasized in the most advanced manuscripts, is that ascension does not mean abandoning the material world, but transforming our relationship with it. A text preserved in the Lion Library states, "The true master of the Merkaba does not seek to escape creation, but returns to infuse it with the light of the higher realms, becoming a channel through which the worlds unite." TTE, this integrative vision challenges the dichotomy between spirituality and worldly engagement. The Merkaba, according to this interpretation, would not be a technology of escape, but of integration, allowing the practitioner to simultaneously inhabit multiple dimensions of reality and serve as a bridge between them. The manuscripts describe the final stage of Merkaba mastery as yichud, or unification, a state where the practitioner not only operates the light vehicle but becomes indistinguishable from it. At this stage, explains a text from the Vienna collection, there is no longer separation between the mystic and the Merkaba, between the traveler and the vehicle, between the observer and the observed. All become a single expression of divine consciousness in motion. This description evokes the concept of non-duality found in advanced contemplative traditions around the world. The Merkaba, at this level of understanding, would not be just a spiritual technology, but a living metaphor for the ultimate potential of human consciousness, the ability to transcend the illusion of separation and directly experience the fundamental unity of existence. What is the final message that Merkaba manuscripts offer for our time? Perhaps it is the understanding that ancient mystical traditions were not mere religious speculations or subjective experiences, but systematic explorations of the multidimensional nature of consciousness and reality, a spiritual science whose insights may be crucial for navigating the transformative challenges of our time. The preserved fragments of these ancient texts, like pieces of a cosmic puzzle, invite us to continue the exploration that Merkaba mystics began millennia ago. Not as mere scholars of historical artifacts, but as active participants in an ongoing evolutionary journey. A journey that, according to the manuscripts, is destined to transform not just isolated individuals, but the collective consciousness of humanity. Like the ancient guardians of this knowledge, we are now invited to decipher not just the physical manuscripts, but the living code of the Merkaba that exists within each human being. A dormant potential awaiting activation in a time of planetary need. What unrevealed secrets await those who have the courage to explore the depths of these enigmatic manuscripts? The journey through the Merkaba continues, inviting each new generation